Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Hell Girl, also known as Jigoku Shoujo, a Japanese horror film from 2019 that is based off of a manga, which I have not read, and was previously adapted into an anime series, which I have not seen. I have had the anime series on my to-watch list for years, but I think I read some mixed reviews of it on certain websites, so I kept kind of shifting it down on the priority list. But after watching this movie, it's kind of shot back up. This film, this live-action version, was directed by our good friend Koji Shiraishi, who I have covered extensively in my Asian horror playlist. Shiraishi is one of those directors who really made an impression on me. So much so, in fact, that I feel the need to seek out and watch every single one of his movies, even the ones that go direct-to-video, because he's made some good ones that have gone direct-to-video. His best film is probably still Noroi, also known as The Curse, from 2005, which is still probably the scariest film I've ever seen. But he has made a bunch of interesting stuff over the years. Now, more recently, viewers may recognize his name as he directed the film Sadako vs. Kayako from a few years back, which is probably the least creative film he has ever done, at least that I have seen, or one of the least creative. My guess for that film is that the producers in the studio kind of tied his hands, tied Shiraishi's hands, because they didn't want him to go too nuts with that franchise, because it's just so well known. Because when Shiraishi does what he wants to do, he can get pretty wacky. Well, after seeing Hell Girl, my impression is that the producers and studio heads of this film basically gave Shiraishi a budget and let him do whatever the heck he wanted to do. So this movie is a Koji Shiraishi film from start to finish, and it is glorious. So Hell Girl is basically a supernatural spirit who can be called upon to enact revenge on a human being's behalf. So if you have been wronged at some point by someone and you really hate their guts, and you want to have this person murdered and sent to hell, you can call upon Hell Girl to do so for you. But the catch is that you yourself must pay for this service by going to hell after you die. So there are consequences to this. Now, from the opening scene alone, I knew that this movie was right up my alley. Alright, so the first scene of the film, we're treated to some fantastic atmosphere and visuals. I mean, they create a really compelling, almost like fantasy horror vibe by using some very deep colors, like oranges and reds, which makes sense because they have a hellish feel to them. There are some shots in this movie that are gorgeous to look at. They really are. Secondly, the opening sequences establish the types of horror imagery to expect for the rest of the film. So, for example, there's use of some flying crows, like outside a really large window, that I particularly enjoyed. I really like it when crows are used as visual representations of death or the afterlife. They're just cool in that fashion. Now, Hell Girl herself as a character is actually presented in a rather beautiful manner. She's played by a pretty actress, which is an interesting contrast to her actions. Even more interesting is that she has 3 supernatural minions who assist her in murdering people and sending them to hell. So there's an old man spirit who is apparently a yokai monster known as the Wanyudo, which I've read about. There's a young swordsman spirit with some special abilities, and finally there's a bone woman spirit, or a spirit of a woman. And all 4 of these spirits, including Hell Girl herself, dress in traditional Japanese clothing from the samurai era. So we're dealing with some very culturally specific horror imagery that is related specifically to Japan. So I'm a sucker for everything that I've just mentioned. So this movie won me over immediately. The opening introduction actually resolves itself, and it's almost like a short film to set up the rest of the film. It does a great job of not only introducing Hell Girl and her minions, but also it establishes the basic rule system, and it introduces one of the main human characters that we see throughout the rest of the film. Now, I have a few more observations about the scare tactics and horror imagery before we move on here. This movie does not rely on jump scares. Huge positive, right there, out of the gate again. The sound design can get intense at times, but it's usually in the form of organ music or long sustaining like background sounds, which I definitely approve of. Also, the death scenes are pretty creative and entertaining to watch. You really have no idea how these people are going to be offed, how they're going to bite the dust. There are some nice surprises to enjoy. If you like creative imagery in your horror films, that's another reason to check this one out. Also, there is some human-inflicted violence as well. You know, that's the nice thing about having Shiraishi as a director. I mean, he's done a bunch of creepy movies, wacky movies, horror movies I'm talking about, and even a few mean-spirited films. Remember, this is the guy who directed Grotesque and A Record of Sweet Murder. So he peppers in a bit of each of those elements into this one, and it really kind of adds to the variety. It gives the film a little bit of an edge. Now, as if all of this weren't great enough, I genuinely enjoyed the human character interaction as well. I think it does a good job of bridging the horror sequences. Remember, Hellgirl doesn't just act on her own. She needs a human to invoke her. So much of this film focuses on human conflicts that motivate certain characters to call for her assistance. So near the beginning, it almost feels like it's setting itself up as like a two-human protagonist story, but then it branches out to include more people. And I think that creates an intriguing series of subplots that help to develop the main premise. And you're not really sure, like, who's going to be the one that calls Hellgirl in this situation? You know, you get a little bit of that as well. And every scene in the movie has a purpose. There's really no dull filler to this film at all, in my opinion. Better yet, there are a few impressive performances, too. So our lead protagonist is played by Nana Mori, who kind of reminded me of Aki Maeda from Battle Royale, due to her portrayal of good-natured innocence. But she also nails a few scenes of strong emotion that I was impressed by. She did pretty good in this. I think Mina Oba did well as like the up-and-coming singer, whose story actually kind of takes center stage for the middle section of the film. And Tima Tamashiro is good as Hellgirl herself. I liked her temperament and ability to make the character interesting despite showing a lack of emotion. But the best performance in this movie, I think, comes from Sawa Nimura, who plays a rebellious girl who befriends Nana's character. And Nimura has a very realistic way of portraying grittiness. Her expressions of emotion are totally convincing. There's a few scenes in this movie where she gets pissed off, and I would be scared of her. If you take this character, put her in a real-life setting, and if she were angry with me, I would be intimidated. Like, that's how convincing she is when she gets angry. So, I really like that. This girl has some serious talent, acting talent, and I can see her doing some, like, intense dramatic roles in the future. Very natural in that regard. She reminds me a little bit of Noriko Iguchi in some ways. An actress who kind of did a lot of indie films and was proficient in those. So I look forward to seeing this actress in the future. So are there any negatives at all to Hellgirl? There are a few, none of which are deal breakers for me. There's an actor by the name of Tomo Fujita. He felt a bit off to me. You know, he plays like this blonde-haired rocker dude. I think he overcooked it at times, and maybe they should have cast someone else instead. I kept thinking about the guy from Cult. There was a blonde-haired guy from Cult who was this cool exorcist dude. They should have just gotten that actor and put him in here. I think he would have done a better job. Also, a few of the special effects scenes are dodgy. But they don't really last too long. Like the dodgy effects. There's one that lasts about 5 seconds. But I'm amazed the studio allowed Koji to keep it in the film. It's one of those scenes. And if you've seen his prior films, you'll have an idea. You'll know what I'm talking about when it happens, because it's like, wow. Really, they kept that one in. But I kind of liked it. There are a few special effects scenes that use like a heavy graininess. It's very grainy because it's depicting like a hellish environment. And some people might not like it. I kind of like the stylistic choice. I thought it was interesting to watch. But overall, the special effects in this film are actually really good. I mean, there's a scene right at the beginning of the film where, when Hellgirl does a certain, I guess you would say, action, there's like CGI flowers that kind of emanate around her and like envelop the person that she's attacking or a person that she's engaging with. And I thought that was done actually quite well. You know what I mean? There's scenes like that. There's some really cool like sky imagery that I'm sure they used some type of a filter or CGI something. They looked awesome in this movie. So even if you're somebody who's seen Koji's prior films, like his low budget stuff, and you really were distracted by the bad special effects in those movies, I don't think you're going to have a problem with this film. There's a few scenes that might take you out, but for the most part, I like the visuals in this. And that's about it in terms of negatives. I mean, I thought this movie was pretty awesome, actually. I saw it twice when I was on vacation in Japan. It has a lot of stuff that I like in my horror films. Tons of atmosphere, cool visuals. It avoids jump scares. Conflicts are good enough to bridge the horror. A few standout performances to enjoy. And remember, it's a Koji Shiraishi movie, so there's going to be some charming weirdness to it. People online, they like to talk about Ring and Dark Water all the time, but it's really movies like Hellgirl and Tag that I'm going to watch over and over and over again. You know what I'm saying? As soon as this movie's available on Japanese DVD or Blu-ray, it'll be without subtitles, but I don't care. I'm buying this sucker like day one. And actually, regarding subtitles, I saw this movie without subtitles in the theater, and I understood, or felt that I understood almost every single thing that happened. So it's very visually presented, very cleanly, story-wise. And so don't worry about watching this. If you could get it without subs, watch it. I think you'll like it. Put this one on your radar. I think it's a lot of fun. And as always, I'll see you next time.